All right, so good evening, everyone. I am so excited for us to finally come together as an official board for the CIB. I'll call the meeting to order at 6:48 p.m. I'm going to start off with Cameron, who's our colleague and partner with NACO, who is joining us to kind of start off with some welcome and introductions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I can't be with all of you. I'm actually in Indianapolis, but glad to join you nonetheless tonight. So my name is Cameron McElhenney. Feel free to call me Cammy. And I have been with the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement since 1998. I actually started out as a member. I was a member of a board, much like yours, in the city of Indianapolis, where we oversaw the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department. I served on that board for 6 years, and one of the greatest lessons I learned during that time is that as a board or commission member working in the realm of civilian oversight, no matter what good intentions you have, very few people come to sit on a board with being experts in oversight, police policy and procedure, and training. And so one of the things I've worked on since my time as being a board member is to work on the training for oversight boards and commissions, and also oversight office staff, so that everybody has a better understanding of not only their own mechanism, but also those in other cities and counties, so they kind of understand how their oversight mechanism lives within the oversight world. So I'm NACOL's Director of Training and Education now, and I put together most of the training programs, the annual conference, I help with webinars, work with communities throughout the country and the world who are looking to set up civilian oversight mechanisms. And so that is what I bring to all of you this evening. And we'll be together for about 8 hours over the course of the next few weeks. And so because we're going to be together for so long, I want to stop and before I talk anymore, hear a little bit from all of you. I can't really see all of you very well all at once.
You will, because we have an owl in here.
Yes, you're all kind of like in a big bubble, and sometimes you're big and then you get small again. But if you can, each of you go through and tell me your name and why you're part of this board and what you hope to bring to it. That would be great. And I think since this is the first time you've all been together, I think it would be great for all of you as well. Anybody want to jump in and start?
I'll go ahead and start. Nice to meet you guys, Randy Grice. Nice to meet you all the way in Indianapolis. Like I mentioned, my name is Randy Grice. Born and raised in North Miami, Florida. My background is in communications and local government. Former writer for the Miami Herald, currently working in local municipal government. I dealt with a lot of my expertise that I currently have. It could be extremely useful on this board. Wanted to positively impact my community. Like I said, a lifelong North Miamian. I hope to learn and grow from the diversity that we have on this board. I think it's a great opportunity, not only for myself, but for everyone else involved. And I appreciate the opportunity.
Great, thanks, Randy.
Mayor being a man.
I guess we have to check and see who made appointments. Don't remember who made
Vice Mayor.
the vice mayor. Okay, well, all right, my name is Kevin Seifried, and I am now retired. I worked for the clerk of the courts in the civil division for almost 45 years. I also have been very active in community service since at least the 1980s, maybe even back into the 1970s. The memory fades as it is we go further back. I served on the City Planning Commission for 30 years, chaired it for 20. And I have numerous other things that I'm involved in North Miami. And I've been a resident of my house and a homeowner now for over 56 years. So, I suppose I'm part to blame for gentrification because I'm not interested in selling. I was happy where I live. I have no desire to move. So I've been very involved in a lot of events and things and feel I have a broad understanding of our city and our services. And I will contribute where I can as we go down the road on this.
Thank you, Kevin. Let's jump in next.
My name is Jory Lang, and I've been the rabbi of that Moshe for 33 years. I'm a clinical psychologist. I started the chaplaincy program for the police department 2 years ago. Go to meetings as often as I can, see what's going on in the city. I try to be quiet. No matter what I say, someone will get angry, especially in members of my synagogue, especially when they're discussing the building of the new stuff here, where the White House was. I'm going to when to be quiet. So lose dealing with Jews is not so much. I think that's another stuff. Anyway, I've lived here for 33 years, and they named the street. I don't know if that's a good thing, because usually that when you die.
Live in legend.
Huh?
I live in legend.
And Andre's my next door neighbor. I can bring your stuff over. And he just put in new windows.
So Andre's being watched, I understand.
Every time he has a party, he used to park him at the synagogue. He has a lot of parties. Good guy. Yeah.
Yeah, been there all the time. Let me just jump in. This is Pierre from Charles. Unlike everybody in here, my background is in education, and I've been a teacher for 14 years and an adjunct professor at Langfield College for about 9 years now, teaching mathematics, what people don't like, and here. And I also serve at the CIA board, the city of Miami, just here with the snowboard, and I'm ready to learn and get from all those great experiences that I heard all over from the previous presenters, and see if I can help out my city, how that I can be an access for this board. So and ready to learn.
Thank you, Pam.
Next to you. Yeah. Yeah, great.
Yeah, I know.
So my name is Rose Michelle Grandpierre, but here, as you know, they like to shorten things, so they call me Rose Grandpierre. As long as I know it's me, that's fine with me. And whenever they needed to, I want people to remember me. I just said, this is a rose, and everybody likes roses. So my background is in HR, but previously I used to work for Department of State, U.S. Embassy back in Haiti for 17 years. I worked with him in the controller's office before I moved from Haiti for what you know. I moved to Canada for a couple of years where I worked with Department of Foreign Affairs and International Social Service Canada, where we tried to reunite displaced families, parents with their kids. So this war that is going on, it's deep to my heart when I know that what the families are going through and when they have to, reunite. And when I left Canada, I landed a job at Miami-Dade County Parks, Recreation and Open Spaces Department, which was a totally different field from, the diplomacy, Department of Foreign Affairs, and then now Parks and Recreation. But I fell in love with it because I thought that people needed to know what was happening and still happening behind the scenes. That's how I ended up landing the outreach specialist position, where I reach out to the community members and sell them parks. That's what I say. So I sell parks. And in addition to that, because my background is in HR, undergraduate and graduate, so I play the role of personal liaison as well. So when I go to the community, I educate, I recruit, I do everything HR together with the outreach. And I am very active in the community. Most members here, they know me by what I do in the community. I go to different events, many events that I can take part in. You name it, like bike ride. I was a member, I was appointed by Mayor BNMA as, not BNMA, the one before him, as Smith, as the BPAC member for 2 terms. I am currently appointed to the Commission for Women recently, and I'm joining this and hoping that it will be a plus, not only for me, but for the community, because the community has a lot of needs, unmet needs that need to be filled out. And I'm pretty sure that I will learn from each one of you so that I complete whatever I have and serve in the capacity that you will see fit. So that's the reason why I'm glad to be among you, scholar and people that I can learn from. And I will also add my 2 cents in whatever capacity I can. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful, Rose. Thank you.
Last but not least, Reginald Hope, H-O-P-E. Background is bail bonds. I started as a bail bondman, bounty hunting, investigative work, and I did a lot of coaching around the community. So I coached at Miami Central High School, Norland High School, American High School, and also North Dade Optical. So I'm pretty familiar with this community. I grew up here, graduated from Miami Central. So that's what I bring to the community as far as my knowledge of the community. Most of the community's knowledge of me. And, also certified as a mediator. So I can kind of bring to it some conflict resolution to some of the issues, but that's just me. I don't have a lot to say. I'm not that much for talking, so that's me.
Thank you, Reginald. Well, it's one, is that, did we get through everybody?
Deandra, then myself.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, yes, please.
Andrea Watson, I'm the administrative specialist for the New Citizen Investigative Board. I recently came, joined the city of Miami Citizen Investigative Board April this year, so I've been close, getting close to my year mark, not quite there yet, but almost there. I'm currently, my background mostly is in healthcare. I did managerial role in healthcare. I'm currently getting my master's in business with concentration in finance right now. Almost done my 2nd year, so I'm done graduating next year.
And I am Phillip Harris, the Executive Director for the Citizen Investigation Board. Definitely excited and glad again to see this work come to fruition. I have been here coming up on a year. Next month, I'll make a full year with the city. I was assistant to the city manager for the city of West Palm Beach. Prior to that, I was responsible for the superintendent's work with Broward County Schools as I was the district recovery manager for dealing with the Marcus Stoneman Douglas shooting that happened at MSD. So I was responsible for dealing with the whole mental health recovery for first responders to our staff, to our students across the whole system of the district. One thing of my skill set is around building systems. I've been in public administration for about 19 years. I'm passionate about an empathetic leader and really truly think that this world and the work that we do, I have a place and a center place to be here. I had an opportunity working under Mayor Rick Baker and Bill Foster in the city of St. Petersburg, where I worked with the Civilian Review Board there as we worked with our community policing and monitoring. I have a wife and 2 kids, a 2-year-old and a 12-year-old that I love dearly to my heart. So I live in West Palm and commute here every day. You know, and it's all about family, and I'm very involved with my church too as well. I'm the director of my youth programming, which is dealing with young adolescent kids, as well as K through third grade for the Seventh-day Adventist Church for Florida. So I work a lot with those children's programs. So that's a little bit about myself. Cameron, Cammy.
Great. Well, it is wonderful to meet all of you. And thank you all for, I can tell from the little you've told me about yourself that you are incredibly busy and committed individuals. And the fact that you've added this to your list is admirable. And I'm really glad that all of you have made the time to be part of this. I work with a lot of oversight entities across the country, and I'm always amazed at the dedication. So I say that as we jump in to our first training module this evening. Now, I can talk a lot, but I would really like to be able to interact with you. So although since I'm sharing my screen, I can't really see any of you very well. If you have a question, please stop me so that we can answer things as we go along, because I want to make sure we have time to answer your questions before the end of our evening tonight. But I will say that, you know, after our training this evening, if you have questions tomorrow, we'll have time at the beginning of tomorrow's session to answer questions that might have come to you after the fact. So this is not your only chance to jump in, but it definitely will break up me talking to you for the next hour. So feel free. So tonight, the two things that we're really going to cover are the basics of civilian oversight of law enforcement. We're going to talk about its history, the models, an overview of the oversight mechanisms. And we're also going to dive in a little bit about, as we're talking about those things, expectations and legitimacy. And then the second thing that we're going to talk about is, just after you know a little bit more about civilian oversight, what it looks like to conduct civilian oversight in the city of North Miami based on your ordinance. That will be a fairly brief overview, but definitely one that we can keep coming back to over the course of the other training modules as well. So first of all, I always like to start with this slide. I think it's really important to think about the fact that there is a lot to do in the realm of reform, particularly when it comes to criminal justice reform and policing specifically. And, you know, there have been a tremendous amount of times where, and I'm sure you've seen them too, where something occurs and someone gets up in front of a podium and they say, well, if we just have civilian oversight, we just have subpoena power, then we will fix all of our problems. We'll fix them. And I think it's really important to remember that there are many things that need to be done. Civilian oversight can't fix all of them, but you can't fix them without it. So it is one very important piece of a larger process of reform. So I kind of like to set that tone as we move into the training, just so we're all kind of having that in the back of our minds. So some basic definitions about civilian oversight. So broadly, civilian oversight is defined as an independent, external, and ongoing review of law enforcement agencies and its operations by individuals outside of the law enforcement agency being overseen. So civilian oversight may entail, but isn't always limited to, the independent investigation of complaints alleging officer misconduct, auditing or monitoring various aspects of the overseen law enforcement agency, diving into things like analyzing patterns or trends in activity, issuing public reports, recommendations on discipline, training, policies, and procedures. And taken all together, these functions can promote greater law enforcement accountability, increase transparency, positive organizational change, and improved responsiveness to community needs and concerns. And really that last piece about improved responsiveness to community needs and concerns really should be at the top of the list, but we put it last so you can keep that in mind most prominently after hearing that long list of things. As an independent and neutral body, civilian oversight of law enforcement offers a really unique way or element of legitimacy that internal accountability and review mechanisms cannot. Because civilian oversight agencies outside of the overseeing agency are just that, outside of the agency, and they report to local stakeholders outside of the law enforcement's chain of command. The findings and reports of an oversight agency are free from real or perceived biases that are often the source of mistrust. Also, similarly, a civilian oversight agency's impartiality, neutrality, and adherence to findings of fact can alleviate officer skepticism in internal systems and bolster procedural fairness that can exist internally and externally to law enforcement agencies. So a few facts about the field. So I really need to change this slide. It says there are nearly 200 oversight entities across the United States. Well, that was true right before 2020. Coming into 2020, we had already seen a fairly exponentially increased number of oversight entities coming online. But after the death of George Floyd, just to kind of give you an idea, if we had just over 200 perhaps going into 2020, since 2020, we have spoken to over 150 different jurisdictions in the United States that are in one stage or another of developing or implementing civilian oversight of law enforcement. So the number of cities and counties who've implemented civilian oversight is unbelievable in the last now almost 3 years. And so we're seeing a lot of changes, rapid changes. A lot of the oversight entities that have come online have combinations of things that we haven't necessarily seen before. And so some of this will be very interesting in several years to see how this all shakes out. We just, and by we, I mean NACOL, just finished a report on the state of the field and effective practices in civilian oversight of law enforcement. And we're already working on starting the next phase of that project, because that may look very different once we see other things happening. Something else that's very interesting about civilian oversight is there are no two entities that are identical. Now, sometimes this is because of local ordinances or collective bargaining agreements, state statutes. It's also has a lot to do with the fact that civilian oversight tends to be a creation based on the needs of the community and the compromises that come about when an ordinance or charter change is put into place, which makes all of them have little nuances that does make cross comparison sometimes a little bit difficult. So we often, rather than talking about best practices, talk about effective practices based on the expertise of those who are doing the work in those agencies. Most large cities and large law enforcement agencies have oversight agencies. In fact, in the last year, we finally got one of the top 10 cities that had been holding out from oversight on board. But Where we're seeing the most growth in civilian oversight are in mid to small size cities. We just helped an oversight entity be established in a city of 14,000. And at the same time, Phoenix was putting theirs in place. So it really runs the gamut. And I think it's also important to say that particularly early in civilian oversight history, oversight was almost always implemented in reaction to a very specific police misconduct incident or scandal. Most oversight agencies can talk about their origin story. What we're seeing now, though, although those incidents still probably occurred, the incident itself might not have sparked oversight, but national incidents and outcries have caused many cities to go ahead and start to implement before they have the next major scandal or incident of misconduct. So that's also a very interesting growth pattern in civilian oversight, and very much based on the national narrative and the local context coming together. So why do people implement civilian oversight? Well, it protects human rights, but it also enhances risk management for jurisdictions. So there's some benefit for your city or county government as well. It ensures greater accountability. It supports effective policing. It increases public confidence and trust in the police, and by doing that, helping them to be able to do their jobs more safely and better. Because when they have the confidence of the community, they're more likely to have cooperation from the community, work in collaboration with the community, which in some instances is non-existent at this point. And it also helps to build bridges. You know, there is a divide in many communities between law enforcement and the public. And I honestly believe that there is no better mechanism than civilian oversight, a neutral body who has a large role in engagement and involvement with the community and other stakeholders. They have one of the best possible places to bring everybody together. It also helps bring understanding, particularly through those engagement and involvement practices. Both understanding of, for instance, police practices to the public, but also being a conduit for information from the public about things that are important to them, things that are happening, things they need the police to understand, bringing that information to law enforcement as well. So earlier I mentioned when we were talking about facts of the field about the evolution of oversight. So civilian oversight has always been seen as a reactive response. And in the beginning, almost completely seen this way. Agencies were often created after a high-profile incident. It responds to in complaints. It waits for complaint to come in to take care of it. Often reviews complaints after one or more, or I'm sorry, reviews policies after one or more complaints have come in. It's really centered around legalistic rules, often an us against them process and an adversarial, recommends sanctions for individual officers, and then relies on the deterrence that comes from those sanctions. Well, although there will always be a need for this reactive element of oversight, the interesting piece is that, well, and let me back up a little bit. There'll be the need for the reactive element because there always will need to be a place where people can bring complaints of misconduct, and some place for them to bring them to be independently investigated if the oversight entity has, like yourself, that ability, or to make sure that there's a fair and impartial review of the investigation if it's done internally to the department. However, but what we're seeing now is that oversight has really moved more towards a proactive basis. It looks at problems proactively on the front end of things through investigation, collection, and analysis of data. And they're really looking for underlying issues and causes, systemic issues, so that they can then make recommendations and focus more on organizational change than reaction to individual instances of misconduct. It builds partnerships with law enforcement. It really has moved to a mentality of working with stakeholders, with your law enforcement agency being one of those stakeholders, rather than separately, so that everybody is kind of working together for proactive change. And definitely, again, and this will come up a lot in the next our time together, is creating bridges between law enforcement and the greater community. So some common goals of civilian oversight is that it's accessible, making sure everyone has access, making sure that the investigations are fair, improving public confidence in law enforcement, and in some cases also in civilian oversight, enhancing the transparency of the police organizations by publicly reporting on the department's efforts in holding the officers accountable, improving the policies and practices and training and management of law enforcement agencies by analyzing patterns and complaints and other police-related data, and deters officers from engaging in misconduct through the creation of more effective and consistent investigation and disciplinary processes, and then also reduces legal liability for the jurisdiction, and helps to improve understanding between law enforcement and the community and law enforcement. So next, I want to talk a little bit about the history of civilian oversight, just so you can kind of understand a little bit more about how long it has taken us to get here. It really puts that 150 jurisdictions looking at oversight in perspective. So the first civilian oversight entity that we know of in the United States was formed in Los Angeles in 1928. It was the Committee on Constitutional Rights. It was formed by the LA Bar Association to review police misconduct complaints. Because it was formed outside of city government, it had absolutely no authority. It reviewed very few complaints, and it didn't have any ability to actually enforce any decisions. Several years later, we have the Wickersham Commission, which recommends that a disinterested agency to combat lawlessness in law enforcement was recommended. And this was actually, I mean, the original, I'm sure most of you already know, but the original Wickersham Commission, which was established by the president originally to look into the effects of prohibition, and it ended up bringing light to widespread corruption and unacceptable tactics by law enforcement. And so, but this is the first time that we see this recommendation by anyone really about having someone that is outside of law enforcement working to combat lawlessness within. In 1948, we have the first official civilian oversight board formed in Washington, D.C. And I really wish I could say great things about it, but it was really deemed to be very ineffective. It operated between 1948 and 1964, and it only reviewed 54 cases in that time. Not too long after that, we have the first iteration of the New York City Civilian Review Board, Complaint Board, formed up and made up of 3 police commissioners and operated completely within the department. It was internal. It was eventually expanded to include citizens in, I think, 1966. And once that happened, it was immediately abolished through referendum.
So Cammy,
Yeah.
why was DC, not successful? What was the what's research show around
So they didn't have cooperation. They couldn't really get any documents. There was slow process in investigation. So nothing was happening in a timely manner. Lots of people, which I will say this piece still exists today every now and then, is because it didn't seem to be effective. They weren't able to ever establish any sense of legitimacy with the public, and people were also very unlikely to file complaints because they didn't think anything would happen with them. So that is, I'm sure that there's a lot more internally about what was happening between the board and the police department, but that's just kind of a big overview of some of the things that went into it being labeled as weak and ineffectual. In 1958, we see the third of our review boards. The Police Advisory Board was formed in Philadelphia. It was abolished by 1969. And it was really, for those who have reviewed it, said it did very little to impact police community relations. But it was the first time that it was a board of citizens who were actually able to refer complaints to the police department for investigations. So not only were they able, they actually had complaints filed in their office as opposed to having to file it at the police department, the police investigating it, and then a group of citizens seeing it for the first time when it crossed in front of them. So definitely still many of the same problems that existed with DC 10 years earlier, but gaining piece by piece, learning some lessons about how things could be a little different. Next. So in 1969, the Kansas City, Missouri Office of Citizen Complaints is established. And really, one of the reasons it's on this timeline is simply because it is the longest continually operating civilian oversight entity in the country. It's never closed its doors. It's never been defunded. It has remained open and it has gained more authority over the years. It's getting ready to probably go through another iteration of what it does and how it does that. But it is interesting that it's the only one that continually existed for this long. Shortly after the creation of Kansas City's model, we also have the Detroit Board of Police Commissioners was formed, and they had investigative power, which is an enormous leap forward from the civilian oversight entities that we had seen previously. In 1973, we see the Police Review Committee established in Berkeley, California. This is really important because it's the first time that oversight is established through voter referendum, and also laid the groundwork for other cities establishing oversight by that same mechanism. They also had investigative powers. So if we leap forward, by 1980, a whopping 13 civilian oversight entities in operation. And that's how many we had after the time frame from 1928 to 1980. 20 years later, we have more than 100 agencies, and in 2020, approximately 200. I expect that by 2025, we're going to see upwards of 275 to 300 entities in the country. Now, I should stop and say that when I'm talking about oversight entities, I am not including in that number advisory boards. Those who just say, yes, you should do this. No, you shouldn't do that. I myself, for a short time, served on a sheriff's advisory board where I sat in a room and listened to what the sheriff was doing once a month. And it's not the same. It's not advisory boards don't have the same access to information. They don't have the same duties and authorities that a board like yourself has. So we tend to not count them in this number. So next, let's talk a little bit about, well, actually, before I go on, any questions? Okay. Let's talk a little bit about civilian oversight models in the United States. So one of the things that's very important when we're talking about models and the development of civilian oversight is also the conversation around legitimacy. So, and legitimacy is often tied, particularly in the eyes of those who are affected by the work of civilian oversight. We're talking about procedural justice. We're talking about, can people trust the process? Is the process neutral? Is everyone involved in the process treated with respect and dignity? And does everyone in the process have a voice? So one of the ways I like to look at it is the work you're doing being done with people or to people? Because my experience has shown me that doing things with people tends to lead to a greater level of productivity and change rather than trying to do something to them. And so in that sense, the movement away from the kind of us and them mentality has, I think, benefited civilian oversight in general. And it definitely has helped build legitimacy, not only with the communities, but also with those who you need legitimacy and cooperation from to actually do your work. So it's important to remember that primary issues shaping people's views about legitimacy is whether police are exercising their authority in fair ways. People will view you the same way. People will look at your legitimacy and put it in the context of whether you, as civilian oversight entity, are exercising your authority in a fair and legitimate way. So just some things to think about as you're moving forward. Because also, there are two types of authority that we're talking about when we're talking about civilian oversight. So there's your statutory authority based on local ordinances. And I wouldn't say that your state law gives you a lot of authority in Florida. I have that same problem in Indiana. But I would say that it's important to note that you do have statutory authority. But it's focused more on people have to do certain things because it's in the law, which is always great if you need to get something done. However, there's also the authority that's based on legitimacy. And it's really about expectations and values, which means you have to be very clear and communicate expectations and values constantly and consistently. The foundation of this type of authority is about being proactive, asking people to comply willingly. It's really, community outreach and engagement is paramount in this type of authority. People see the quality of the process as important and sometimes more important than the actual outcome. It's about looking at how you can change the conditions that lead to police misconduct. And it's about measuring success rather than in a more statutory authority-based model, measuring numbers and results. So kind of keeping all of that in mind, civilian oversight is really divided into four basic models. We have the review-focused model. We have, which ensures the community has the ability to provide input into the investigation process, whether that's by reviewing an investigation that's already been completed, whether it's reviewing or internally, or, and I'm sorry, my animals are fighting in the background, so I apologize for the sound. It's about community review of investigations that may increase public trust in the process. And an individual or board or commission authorized to review completed internal affairs investigations, because they have the ability to agree or disagree with the findings, adds legitimacy to the overall process in the eyes of the community. We also have the investigative model, really has full-time civilian investigators, or in your case, contractual at this point, that have highly specialized training. There are some civilian oversight entities that do bring in people who might not have a ton of investigative experience, but they're so large that they train them. An example of that would be the New York City's Civilian Complaint Review Board. Most oversight agencies, which I must say that's kind of an outlier, but the most agencies who are in investigative review or investigative focused, they have investigators on contractually or on staff who do have training and experience in investigations. When you are doing an investigation in this type of model, you don't rely on the investigators from within the police department always, although there are lots of hybrid situations where sometimes there are concurrent investigations are done alongside the police department. Sometimes there are models where you're doing it independently, and sometimes rather than it being an independent investigation, it's an internal investigation. And civilian-led investigations may improve community trust in that process. Next, we have the auditor monitor focused model. And this really is one of the more proactive models that we see. It was really became more prominent in the 2000s, and it's become very prominent more recently because it has more robust reporting practices. It promotes long-term systemic change because of that recommendation ability and the ability to audit. Like for instance, one of the great powers of this model is that they can do things like audit officer discipline, which not only looks to see are those who need to be disciplined being disciplined, but it also looks at are officers being disciplined fairly and consistently within a department, which can be a huge problem. So things like that benefit not only the community, but also those serving in law enforcement. It also allows the law enforcement agency to actively engage in many of the steps of the complaint process alongside the oversight agency, because they're able to provide information, to be able to respond to recommendations. So it does also provide a collaborative aspect. And then finally, we have the catch-all, where the hybrid model, where it contains one or more. So for instance, your model is absolutely a hybrid model. You have members of the community doing reviews, but you also have the ability to do independent investigations. It is becoming harder and harder to find a model in the United States that isn't a hybrid, particularly those that are coming online. Because in addition to involving the community in what was often, the review model was often the most common that we saw anywhere. Because having the community have a voice in the process is so civilian oversight. But now communities are saying, well, but we want that, but we also want a full-time staff who's going to be able to do some of these other things to actually pull in systemic change aspects, being able to do independent investigations when necessary. So that's why these are becoming so much more increasingly common. So,
Can we pause there?
mhm.
Open up the floor. Anybody have any questions around these 4 models per se?
Which model is North Miami?
We're an investigation model. And that's based on how our ordinance is written. So when we do our next session, we're gonna dive into how our ordinance was written. Our legal attorney is gonna be here. He's gonna go on more details about it. But we have the investigative model.
Have we established already the core values that we base ourselves?
I could not hear the question. I'm sorry.
Any question?
Have we established, have we established any core values which we will base our work upon?
So I think that now that the board is now being established, first of all, again, the investigative board and investigative process was established based upon our governing board of the city council. However, now that you all are in place, as an advisory board, there may come a way that we may change that model, bring recommendations to them to change the model to be more hybrid, or maybe a review board process. We can't validate which one best fits as of yet, because we're just now coming to fruition, right? We just now, based on our model, we have a contractual investigator that's working with the city. Depending on what happens, if there are cases that come about and so on and so forth, whether we have to bring one on full time, whether we need to start looking at their policies and procedures and so on. So things could potentially change based upon now of us being established. Or we may find overall in general that we may not necessarily really need a civilian oversight. And we only need it based upon if a case comes up, then we convene to address a specific issue. So it really just depends, but we have to start somewhere.
Well, and the great thing is that given the language of your ordinance, you really do have, there are elements of the review focused model in your ordinance because of you all sitting there. And the authority that the ordinance gives you to review closed things and also direct pieces of the process. You also have a little bit of the monitor auditor focus piece because of the ability to make recommendations. So it'll be interesting as you go along and you're able to kind of access those different pieces as needed, how that works. And like you said just now, kind of then be able to really think about what is working. Are there other authorities that we might need? Are we good where we are? So it'll be very interesting. You have a very interesting model, definitely.
I'll bring to the attention. So say, for example, one of the policies that I had reviewed, like really on the onset when I started here, was looking at a policy that the police department established around dealing with individuals that are autistic. And that policy was established based upon the incident we had here, right? But it's more just narrow specific to that type of targeted population. Is that something that we would review to determine whether it needs to be broadened more to the behavioral health realm, right? And I use behavioral health because of working with residents around trauma and so on and so forth, that it may not necessarily be substance, it may not necessarily be mental health, but maybe behavioral health as a whole, where you're dealing with special needs people and so on and so on. So that may be something that you all may bring up to want to review, that we can assess and determine whether we want to bring that recommendation or modification of that policy procedure based on other policy procedures that we've seen of other agencies. So that's just an example of something.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So one question I get asked a lot after I start talking about the different models is one better than another? And the answer to that is, first of all, I'm not allowed to have favorite models. But the thing is that each one of these has strengths and weaknesses. There are definitely, I really appreciate jurisdictions' willingness to start embracing bits and pieces from all of these models to build a better mechanism. Because I do think by doing that, by no longer solely reviewing and saying, oh no, we just need a review board. Or we just need this. I think that it's allowing cities to really put something into place that can make a difference. So I think that's exciting. But really the model that's ultimately chosen depends on the history and narrative of the community that it's serving, the level of support that it has, both politically and financially. That's just a reality that we have to face when ordinances are put into place. They all have different levels of authority and independence. And I often, when I'm working with communities who are in the establishment phase of oversight, trying to put together an ordinance, I like to have them spend a lot of time on what do you want this to do? What are your expected outcomes from this process? It's important to think about what you want to accomplish by implementing civilian oversight in a community. And I think even in your case where the oversight entity is, you have an ordinance, it's being implemented. I think it's also important for you all to understand what you want the outcomes to be, because that's going to help you as you communicate expectations to the community. Because the unfortunate part of the process of civilian oversight is that entities are put into place, but it takes time for them to do things that eventually where people can see the change. And so you're put into place and there's all of this excitement and the forming and the need, and then all of a sudden everybody's just waiting for something. And they don't even know really most of the time what they're waiting for. Sometimes they're waiting for changes that may take years to happen. Sometimes they're waiting for just anything. So communication and clear expectations, which we'll really talk about more in one of the modules down the line, are really important in this process. And when thinking about your model and the work that you're going to do. So I'm going to quickly go through these next, just kind of the range of authority. The review focus receives complaints and forwards them on for investigation. They almost always, but not all the time, have professional staff. There are a couple of boards out there. The one in Ferguson, Missouri is an excellent example. They establish a board, they don't have any staff. So they're not only expected to volunteer to be a civilian oversight review board member, they also have to figure out how to run their board and do all of the work that's normally done by a staff person. They can recommend disposition of cases or agree or disagree with dispositions. Often they can send cases back to internal affairs for additional investigation. Community engagement is incredibly important, whether it's solely a review focused model or like yourselves, you're part of kind of a hybrid. It is really important to be out in the community, to hear from them, and to also let them know more about what you're doing. In the investigation focused model, can replace critical functions of internal affairs units altogether. There are some where an example of an investigation focused model that's a little different is that in Seattle, for the Seattle Police Department, that their oversight mechanism involves the Office of Professional Accountability, or I'm sorry, Office of Police Accountability, where the head of the Internal Affairs Division is a civilian. And the staff investigating misconduct complaints many of them are civilians, but they're also officers who are seconded for the work for a period of time, much like in any internal affairs process. And then there are also models like DC that are almost wholly investigative models, where they have a large staff of investigators and they do all investigations of misconduct outside of the law enforcement agency. auditor monitor can really have a very wide range. They don't do, if it's solely an auditor monitor focused model, a great example of this would be the Office of the Independent Monitor in New Orleans. They can take in complaints, they can do complaint classification, but they don't review or they don't investigate the complaints, I'm sorry. They do a lot of auditing of investigations to make sure that they comply with established policies and procedures. They monitor, they investigate the issues at hand. They look at law enforcement policies. They make recommendations. And as always, none of these models really survive without community engagement of some sort. And then we've already kind of talked about the hybrid models. But I will add that there's two different types of hybrids. There's a hybrid agency, where it's one agency that has different types of models contained within it, like a review board that also has an office that does investigations. But there's also hybrid systems. So to use the example of Seattle again, Seattle has several different oversight agencies that all have some part of overseeing the Seattle Police Department. So we have the Office of Police Accountability that does the investigations. We have the community, I know I'm going to mess up one of the names, I apologize. We have the Office of the Inspector General that performs the monitoring and auditing function, but they also are kind of overseeing the Office of Police Accountability as well. So not only are they overseeing the police department, but there's also some oversight happening as well to make sure that everybody is doing the job that they're mandated to do in a professional and fair and consistent manner. So moving on from that, I want to pause there because we have about 10 minutes left. And I want to make sure we have time for some questions because I can pick this up, the conducting civilian oversight in North Miami. I have a brief kind of overview of the work that's in the ordinance and how that relates to civilian oversight in general. But I want to make sure we have time for questions on civilian oversight in general. And in fact, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second so I can see you to see if there are any questions.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Thank you. A little bit earlier in the presentation, you mentioned that, after George Floyd 2020, there was a high spike in oversight boards throughout the nation. Obviously, we're one of them. We came after George Floyd. What type of challenges have you seen those boards struggle with, or any type of learning curve that we could possibly expect?
Yeah, so I would say, so there's several. So one of them is about momentum. So we had an incredible amount of momentum in 2020 going into 2021. And for those who have been established, what happens is if there isn't anything horrible happening, people stop paying attention. If there aren't enough videos or newspaper articles, people tend to not pay attention. It's kind of like the people who think that there's just this, in the last 10 years, that there's been this increase in police misconduct or some of the other issues that go along with policing. Well, those things have always happened. We just didn't have cell phones and YouTube and Instagram and Twitter. And so if there aren't things happening, people tend to not pay attention. Now, the good news is that with more civilian oversight and also we've also seen this renewed commitment to kind of working with people to make something happen with all the stakeholders. So there is also a possibility that someday it starts getting better and the work of civilian oversight is actually working. But it's also about maintaining vigilance and community interest between here and there.
So Cammy, so let me kind of piggyback off that too as well, right? So you said momentum from a context that I'm viewing as you're saying that could look like from a negative aspect, right? If you're being responsive to incidents and so on and so forth. But the way that coming on the onset of looking at how our operations and the dynamic of the culture of our city, we've also put it in place where it may be accommodations that may come forward, meaning that positive things that are happening in our community,
Yeah.
right? From more, so that's where the approach of community engagement and how our community policing is happening so effectively in our city as a positive model that we made to maintain that momentum and maybe maintain the momentum of positive stories that are happening or where we're recognizing police officers for doing things over and beyond, which you guys will be able to see that. That's in the deck that we have here. You'll be able to see that on our website, that residents and citizens will have the opportunity to provide accommodation just as a way that they can file complaints too. So I've kind of made that change since from an operational staffing perspective for us as a city. I like that.
And one of the things, we've gotten a tremendous,
Proactive instead of reactive.
Exactly. Go ahead, Cammy, sorry.
no, that's okay. No, thank you for that. One of the things too that we've seen is that some of the boards and commissions and oversight agencies in general, when they were formed, there were so many people around. So many people were interested and helped kind of did the work to get it here. And then they wonder where everyone went. Well, they've kind of turned the work over. They've handed it off. And so one of the things I would suggest from watching other agencies is to make sure that you know, if there aren't a lot of cases, focus your energy on community engagement. If they're, you know, try to keep momentum internally going, and also make sure that all of it is, and we're going to talk about annual reports and reporting procedures later, but make sure that it's all documented. Because sometimes when you're just going, I mean, they've handed it off, you guys are doing the work, and regardless of whether anybody's at your public meeting or not, you're still doing the work. Make sure that there are things that are out there for people to see what you've done, why they weren't around, so that they understand that even though they weren't watching, you were still doing the work. There are a lot of oversight agencies who find themselves having to explain what they were doing because another critical incident happened, and they're like, well, you must not have been doing anything because look what happened. Minneapolis is an excellent example of that. One thing I will say is you guys do have an amazing website. It is easy to navigate. I can find everything on it. And so make sure to keep up the easily accessible information on the website. And, you know, make sure that if you're doing reports, annual reports or special reports, that those are all easy to click on and read, so that people know what you've been doing. So that's one thing. Any other questions? Okay.
We're good.
Okay, well then we'll just, so the next section that I was supposed to present tonight, we're going to pick that up and we're going to move it to another night. But because I know you had some other business you wanted to attend to tonight, correct?
Right. So at this part of the agenda, we want to move forward with you all collectively, make a decision related to structure, right? Because I'm just here to start the meeting off, but because this is you all lines of the board, to select a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary. So then we can move forward as we conduct business. Okay. So, you know, we kind of had an introduction of who each other is and everything like that, but what's going to happen is pretty much I could just open up the floor for nominations. And the ordinance is written based on going forward with Robert's rule, you know, what Robert said. So at this point in time, we can just entertain Any of you want to nominate yourself, that's perfectly fine too as well.
I'd like to go ahead and open up the floor. I'd like to nominate myself for the chair of the board. I think that we have a very diverse board. I think that I'm someone that's able to guide the conversation and kind of make sure that the needs, the voices of everyone is met on this board. Make sure that our initiatives are definitely felt. I don't know what you mentioned as far as community engagement, but make sure that we're active. Make sure that North Miami knows we're here, knows what we're doing, and knows that we're engaged and dedicated to the community. So I would like to nominate myself, and I would appreciate your support.
Second,
Yeah, so there's a motion on the floor that's done, and it's now been seconded by Rabbi Lang, who supports that. I will call to question. Any question? Any question? Any further discussion? All in favor by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Those against say nay. All right, thank you very much. Congratulations. So Randy Rice is now the chair. And I'll now open up the floor for a vice chair. Anybody interested or somebody wants to nominate someone?
if no one, I would be very happy if no one else wants.
Rabbi Lang,
Second.
seconded by Randy Grice. Any further questions, discussion? All in favor by the sign of aye. Those against say nay.
Nay.
Oh, all right, there's a nay, there's one nay.
I will call for a revote. I think I'll just vote my eye.
Motion passes.
Okay, it's vote.
All right. And now we'll open it up for secretary.
I'll pick up on that and I'll nominate my left side, suppose as the well secretary.
There's rules. So all, the secretary is, we're capturing the minutes. The meetings are always recorded. Deandra is capturing that, but there's sometimes that you may, capture something here or there or whatever, what have you. But we communicate to the board because of the fact that the sunshine law is water, right? So that's kind of, so it's more of just position per se.
Motion to take a line.
Okay, yourself, Pierre, is there a second?
Second.
All right, seconded by Mr. Grice for secretary. All in favor by the sign of aye? Those against say nay. All right, motion passes. Great. So now we have a chair, vice chair, and a secretary. I will be updating your placards. So tomorrow, when we convene, Randy, you will call the meeting to order, as I will be a staff to sit aside, and we'll be following the agenda as it's been presented. Related to the next steps, as Cammy had said, we're going to move the second part of the agenda of our presentations to tomorrow. More likely that should probably fit in, and we'll start promptly at 6 o'clock. So at this time, we'll open up there any public comment.
Wait, I have a comment. These are very pretty shirts.
Yes.
What are they supposed to be doing?
So I'm glad you brought that up. I wore mine tonight because I wanted just to show you. Let's let you all, that you all can decide if you want to wear them, tomorrow, if you want to wear it to the next meeting. But I do want to do a photo with you all with them, kind of just more as a formal one. But I do want to set up a professional photo shoot for everyone too as well. I will show you all right now, as Cammy was saying about our website. If you haven't had the chance, you just go to North Miami CIB, and this is our website. You'll notice that the ordinance is here, how to join for those who are interested, because we do have one more seat available still. Councilmember Galvin's district, we do still have that position still available, so individuals can still apply. This right here shows who our appointed members are, which you all are here. You can click on it and it will open up your bios, just so you can see of everyone. Then you go back to the front, and for staffing purposes, you'll see us here, right, who we're comprised of. As she mentioned, we're set up to where we have full-time staff and then we have contractual staff. So that's what we have. Reginald Hope, who you all see, is our investigator. And Roderick, who's our general counsel, who you all will see coming up later in the training. Then for residents, if they want to file a complaint or accommodation, as I shared before, this is now an active link. We activated it because we had our press release went out early this week. You all are starting your training. So now if an individual wants to submit a complaint, this is a database system that we have built with a vendor known as Clarity Value. Our investigator had a chance to look at it and see what we put together, and I think he's proud to say, very impressed on how we will review and do cases. We've had, just so you're aware, we did have 4 cases come across our desk without even promoting this out there, reference to our operation and so forth. Those cases are now officially closed, but there weren't cases that necessarily needed to come to a board, ideally. So that process is in place. It shows the individual how to file a complaint. And then if you go down here, the types of complaints, which you will all learn further, which is in our ordinance, we have that there. Our CIB investigative process, we lay that out, exactly what our process is. Our residents and citizens can also follow us on social media. I'm not a big, social media person, but we're working with partners with communication to help us with that too as well, and some of our branding. And then our news, as I shared with you in the back of your binder, you'll see this was the press release that came out yesterday on the 5th, announcing you all officially appointed, as well as our first series of meetings that we're having. So wanted to kind of share that with you all. Yes. Not yet. You're going to be on there soon. As of the 13th, we're going to be adding your name on officially. So yes, your polos, if you all decided, you all pick what you want to wear. When we have our official meetings, if those are days that you want to wear them to, if we have community affairs out in the community, so people know who we are or whatnot, we recently ordered a tablecloth, so we can have that. We call it retractable banner. We're putting together collateral material so that we can communicate to the community and so on and so forth. So we're moving forward from operation and as well as support.
Is there already a designated date when we have our meetings?
No, you all will make that decision. On the last day of the training, our last meeting, which will be on the 19th, I want you all to make a decision on how frequently you'll want to meet. Cammy will be here to kind of help us, guide us in that direction, based upon, again, we only review cases based on a case-by-case scenario, right? So that's how.
I would suggest that the website is obviously complaint oriented, but there should be a subheader for accommodations.
That's on there. We have the area.
Well, I know you had the complaint accommodation, and then everything else pertaining to complaints.
Oh, you mean just create a separate one just for
Yeah,
accommodation?
just in case somebody wants to say somebody did something good, how do I report that? Well, there should be a page for that.
We can do that.
We don't want to create the impression that we're only dealing with complaints, but we can also deal with positive accommodations.
Correct. So we can split that up.
Yeah.
That's actually much better, would give us much better working relationship.
Yeah.
Yes, I think so too. And it doesn't create the impression that we're just carrying a big stick to beat people up.
Correct.
We don't want bad things to happen. We want good things to happen.
Right, and so you should have, you've got your header, and then there should be, here's the accommodation page, and this is how you say something good, and then here's the complaint page, if you have something there.
We'll work on that.
Obviously, our police officers know how to search this stuff out, and I think it will play well if we have the accommodation page or the complaint page. I know there's a lot of other ways for accommodations made, but given that we've set this up,
Yes.
we should have an established form of an acknowledgement of how to do that.
100%, if we just have it listed, which is not, but complaints, we would appear to be adversarial. And that's the
Yeah,
opposite.
that's the opposite.
And we don't want to start off that way. There may be times when it will happen that way, but we want to be proactive on the accommodation side as well, at least as far as the website goes. Give people an opportunity. Nothing more than just putting if it results in just a simple letter in an officer's file, it matters.
Because we need the communication first before the complaint.
Yeah.
And another thing, if I may, is to think about the disabled.
Yes.
So, I need to take this into consideration already.
So talk to us a little bit about
I know, for example, we have valuable accommodations that we can make for someone, who, for example, can type, who can, who wants to, instead of typing, but
Voice it
Yes,
verbally.
exactly.
Yeah, so that's something that we have to look through. I know the fact that we made the forms available. If someone wants to call us and we can talk through with them and we can fill it out for them. But if a person wants to just record it and submit it like that online, they do have the ability, because we have the ability to do MP3 files and so on and so forth. But we're still, I'm glad you brought that up, because we can go back to the engineers on how we can make that happen.
Yes.
So of course, it could voice the whole form versus actually writing and typing it out.
Exactly.
Correct.
And the second one is language,
Correct.
Spanish, Creole, and
And the website automatically converts. We can convert, if a person's on, we can convert it to the different languages that understand based on their language.
perfect.
Which is perfect. Good deal. Yes,
Chair, vice chair, secretary.
correct. All right. Anything else good?
Just one point I want to make, just outside of everything, shout out to Mr. Hope. So this year we did 14 years as a teacher at my Central Senior High.
Is that right?
So we got that going.
That's good. That's good.
All right.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Cammy, anything else that you have for us? You're muted.
Thank you. No, nothing, just thank you for being here tonight, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Cammy. Meeting is now.
One last.
Oh, sure.
I make it part of the record, whatever it's worth.
Yes.
You know, I actually read this bio that I've got in here. And the third paragraph is a mess. So we need to sit down and go over that. It's grammatically incorrect. The dates are wrong. And that needs to be cleaned up.
So if you have your bios that you need to update, we can get with Ms. Watson over here and we can make those changes.
Yeah, I could get an appointment at the office, go down and just take a read through and delete this and change that and the minor stuff, but it's very inaccurate the way it is. If anybody actually read it and tried to piece it
Piece
together.
it together.
You know, I don't expect anybody's gonna be looking me up and chasing after me, but nowadays, you just never know. And so we'd like to try and make this as reasonably accurate as we can.
All right.
All things being equal.
It's a good deal. We'll adjourn the meeting at 8:11 p.m.
You could
So-
change your